The crown prince fell in love with the mute girl who saved him and insisted on breaking off our engagement. I offered some well-intentioned advice. The mute girl has no support. It would be better to take her as a concubine first. The mute girl, feeling insulted, took her own life in shame. 10 years later, the first thing the crown prince did after securing the throne was to depose me as empress and annihilate my entire clan. This is what you all owe Elara. When I awoke again, it was my 16th birthday banquet. The person in the seat of honor asked me what my wish was. I only wish for His Highness, the crown prince and Miss Liu, to grow old together and be forever united. I bowed reverently. Your Majesty, please grant them a marriage. I died on a snowy day. I could have held on until spring, but Julian couldn't wait. The dagger pierced my chest, inch by inch, and blood stained the bed. Still not satisfied, he twisted the handle, the cold blade churning my flesh. I could barely breathe from the pain, but I still asked, why? I didn't understand. We had known each other since childhood. For over a decade, my father and brothers had been loyal to the crown, offering him their unwavering support. They had even relinquished their military power before he had fully consolidated his authority. Yet, he had still found some trumped Jan-up charge to destroy my family. Why, Julian? I clutched his wrist. His face was paler than the snow outside. He was the one who had struck the blow. Yet his expression was as if I had betrayed him. This is what you all owe Elara. He gritted his teeth. Elara, Liu, Elara. The name was so distant. It took me a moment to recall it, and the delicate, willowed Zan-like face behind it. I couldn't help but laugh. 10 years. So in all those years, he had never forgotten her, and he had blamed her death on me, on my entire family. Julian, you truly are a fool. Before I could get the word out, he pulled the dagger out. A spray of red blood landed on my tongue. It was sweet, like the bird's nest soup my mother had stayed up all night to make for me that year. My lady, is your heart aching again? The snow vanished. The biting cold was gone. It was spring, and the world was bustling with life. It was my 16th birthday banquet. It seemed the heavens had taken pity on me. I had closed my eyes and opened them again. Not dead, but back at the age of 16. This was the year my brother had won a great victory, and my father had been praised for controlling the floods. This was the year I had not yet married Julian. Of course her heart is aching. A sneer came from behind. His Highness the Crown Prince knelt outside the throne room all night, trying to break off his engagement with the minister's daughter. My maid Leah was about to confront them, but I stopped her. It wasn't just about breaking off our engagement. That year Julian had fallen off a cliff while suppressing bandits, and had been saved by a lone girl. The girl was beautiful and gentle. To save him, she had tasted countless herbs, ruining her own health and losing her beautiful voice. Julian, deeply moved, had brought her back to the palace. Including last night, he had been kneeling for 3 days, demanding to make her his crown princess. My lady, don't listen to the gossip. You and His Highness have known each other since you were children. His Highness to you. I looked at Laya and shook my head. Her words trailed off. I knew what she was going to say. I had woken up in my family home 3 days ago, enough time to sort through my past and present lives. My lady, Leah's eyes suddenly lit up. His Highness the Crown Prince is here. I looked up and saw Julian, in his usual court attire, walking towards me, surrounded by a crowd. The whispers behind me instantly died down. Julian and I were childhood sweethearts, our engagement arranged before we were even born. If anyone had ever spoken ill of me, he was the first to defend me. If he was punished, I was the first to plead for him. Before this, no one would have doubted that I was his one true love, the only candidate for crown princess. But today, on my 16th birthday, he had brought another woman. Ilara was pale and slender, clinging to his side like a frightened bird. Julian, despite having knelt all night, showed no signs of fatigue. He smiled and whispered something in her ear. She looked at me, her expression instantly turning to one of panic and distress. She rushed forward and knelt before me with a thud. Just like in my previous life, even the single glistening tear on her eyelash was the same. Last time, I had been deceived by her pitiful act and had genuinely tried to help them. I was born into a noble family, and my future husband was the crown prince. I had never dreamed of a one-life, one-love romance. Her appearance had made my heart ache, but it hadn't made me lose my composure. When Julian had wanted to break off the engagement, I hadn't cried or made a scene. I had simply offered some sincere advice. Miss Liu has no support in the capital, and she is impaired. The position of crown princess. I'm afraid even if you kneel until your knees break, His Majesty will not allow it. It would only bring her disaster. Your Highness, perhaps it would be better to take a step back, bring her into the palace first, and in the future. I had said cryptically, whatever happens in the future will be up to you. Those few words had saved her from disaster, but had brought ruin upon me. Thud, thud. Last time, the moment she knelt, I had rushed to help her up. This time, I just watched coldly as she kowtowed, her forehead hitting the ground with a dull thud. Leah tugged at my sleeve. All the guests were watching. I brushed her hand away. What was the rush? Ilara! Julian's face was already turning dark. In just a few moments, Ilara's forehead was already broken. Combined with her tears, she was the very picture of pitiable beauty. She looked at Julian, then at me, bit her lip, and continued to kowtow. I leisurely picked up my teacup. I was curious to see just how far she would take this act. That is right, Ilara was faking it. Her muteness, her pitiful act, even her shameful suicide. In my previous life, it was all an act. I had once overheard her in a deserted alley, her voice like a songbird's, pleading with a masked man. Master, if I don't use such drastic measures, how will His Highness ever take me seriously? Master, please give me another dose of the feigned death potion. Master, I truly love the crown prince. I know my status is low, but he promised me the position of crown princess. I must make a scene over this to make him feel guilty. Master, please help me. Just one feigned death, and His Highness will forever remember what he owes me. Such an actress. She had fooled Julian, fooled me, fooled the entire capital. I had once asked Julian why he was so devoted to her. I was born a crown prince. Everyone fawns over me. They respect me, they love me, but only because of my title. Even you, Serafina, if I weren't the crown prince, would you still love me? His question had stumped me then. If he weren't the crown prince, we would never have been engaged, never have grown up together. How could there be love? Only Ilara, she was willing to risk her life for me without even knowing who I was. Serafina, how could I resist such pure love? I had almost been convinced. As a noblewoman, I always thought 3 steps ahead. I had my parents, my family to consider. I would never so easily risk my life for someone, but we had both overlooked another possibility. Even after falling from a cliff, Julian's clothes alone would have revealed his noble status. Whether he was a young master, a duke's son, or the crown prince, Ilara had been determined from the start to latch on to him. Enough! Julian roared. The hall fell silent. Ilara trembled, looking up at me with pleading eyes. The meaning was clear. She had ruined my engagement, made me a laughingstock, and she was deeply sorry. If I didn't say something, she would never stop. Fine. Then continue. I raised an eyebrow and sipped my tea. Elara gritted her teeth and was about to kowtow again when Julian strode forward and swatted the teacup from my hand. Serafina, don't go too far. Is this the grace of the eldest daughter of the She family? He snarled, his anger causing the servants to drop to their knees. He pulled Elara up, his hand gently touching her bruised forehead. Apologize. Apologize now, and I will pretend this never happened. I almost laughed out loud. How naive I had been. After discovering Elara's deception, I had immediately written to Julian, warning him. The next day, Elara was dead. For real this time. The rumor was that she had killed herself out of shame, unwilling to be a mere concubine. Julian's reply had been simple. Thank you for the warning. Those who deceive me shall be punished. For years, I had thought he had seen through her and had her killed. After all, he hated being deceived. It wasn't until I was on my deathbed that I understood. The one he had meant was me. Serafina, are you mute? It was I who wanted to break off the engagement. Apologize to her, and I will overlook the injury on her forehead. I looked at him and smirked. I had been so blind. I had always thought he was wise and clever. Laia, is His Majesty in the front hall? I turned to my maid. She nodded dumbly. I gathered my skirts and walked forward. Julian followed. What are you doing? My father is here incognito. He hasn't summoned the female relatives. Of course I knew. A mere minister's daughter's birthday was not enough to warrant the emperor's presence. But why was he here? Because both my brothers were winning victories on the border, because my father had just successfully managed the floods, earning praise from the people, because for a century, most of the court's key officials had come from my family, and the crown prince had been kneeling for 3 days to break off his engagement with me. The emperor was afraid of alienating my father and brothers. Serafina, Julian was still behind me as the eunuch announced our arrival. Don't use your birthday to ask my father for things that don't belong to you. I have already promised Elara the position of crown princess, and I will not go back on my word. If you insist on marrying me, you can only be a secondary consort. I glanced back at him. As he said, he was born a crown prince. His life had been too easy. He had no idea what the position of crown princess meant to him. My glance must have been too cold because he froze. Serafina, the emperor said from his seat, you wish to see me. The hall was full of guests. I knelt. Your Majesty, today is my birthday. May I be so bold as to ask for a wish? His Highness the Crown Prince and Miss Liu have a love forged in hardship, which I greatly admire. I fear I may stand in the way of their happiness. Your Majesty, please annul the engagement between His Highness and myself, and grant them a marriage. I knelt reverently. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Before evening, the news had spread throughout the capital. The engagement between the Crown Prince and the Shia family was likely off. The story of the Crown Prince and his savior was already a hot topic. And today, the eldest daughter of the Shi family, a paragon of nobility, had publicly requested to break off the engagement at her own birthday banquet. They said the Crown Prince's expression at that moment had been priceless. The emperor had simply called him a rebellious son and had thrown a teacup at him. Nonsense. I too was hit by a teacup. Who gave you the audacity to be so bold? My father's beard was practically standing on end. Break off the engagement? Marriage is a matter for parents to decide. Is it for a woman like you to interfere? And you dare to be so presumptuous in front of His Majesty? I knelt straight and backed, not even blinking. The engagement was decreed by the late emperor. Do you think you can just break it off? You will go to the palace and apologize. Say it was a moment of foolishness. No, I said flatly. No. Then what will you do? Break it off. Break it off. Break it off. If you break it off, do you think anyone in this city will dare to marry you? I smirked. I wouldn't be so sure. You've been possessed, he yelled and stormed out. He was right, I was possessed. If it weren't for my past life, I would never have done such things. I had been raised to be a model of propriety. I would never have even appeared in a hall full of men, let alone requested to break off an engagement. But propriety had brought me nothing but ruin. The Shia family had always known when to advance and when to retreat. When the court needed them, they fought bravely. When the court was stable, they withdrew. Their absolute loyalty had earned them the trust of generations of emperors. That was why, in my previous life, the moment Julian had shown the slightest inclination, they had handed over their power without a second thought, and he had caught them completely off guard. Absolute loyalty to a fool is called foolishness. My lady, what did His Highness say? Laia couldn't read. She was applying a compress to my knees and looking eagerly at the letter in my hand. Julian and I used to write to each other constantly. This time, there were only 4 words. Know when to stop. I smirked and held it to a candle flame. My lady, Leah cried, if His Highness is apologizing, you should yield. Besides the letter, did anything else arrive for me today? I cut her off. Leah was taken aback. Yes. She handed me a piece of white jade from my dressing table, her eyes lighting up. Today is your birthday. Is this also from His Highness, the Crown Prince? My own eyes lit up. I stood and grabbed my cloak. My lady, what has gotten into you these past few days? Where are you going so late? Wait for me. Stay here, Laia. I closed the door and left. The Serafina of the past few days was not the same as before. The proper Serafina was dead. What was left was the rebellious Serafina. The man before me was thin and pale. A single mole at the corner of his eye was a striking, seductive red. He looked very different from my memories. As I studied him, he studied me, his dark eyes seemingly casual. Miss Shia lives up to her reputation, he said, his voice like falling pearls. Beautiful and dignified. I smiled back. Your Highness lives up to your reputation, the bearing of a pine and cypress. We were both speaking in pleasantries, both knowing the truth. The fruits Miss Shi sent a few days ago. He gestured to the bowl on the table. Are ripe. I opened my hand to reveal the white jade. I received your Highness's beautiful jade. I took a piece of fruit. He reached for the jade. I closed my hand. He paused. I smiled at him. His name was Damien. He was the Emperor's eldest son, Julian's older brother. My father was right. My engagement to Julian, decreed by the late Emperor, could not be so easily broken, but I knew it had to be. On the first day of my rebirth, I had searched my memories and found him high status, good position, and most importantly, he had died young. Strictly speaking, he was the Emperor's eldest legitimate son. The position of Crown Prince should have been his. My engagement should have been his, but his mother had been weak and had died shortly after giving birth to him. He, too, was sickly. Before he was a year old, the court astrologer had predicted he would not live past 18. Thus, the throne was destined to be out of his reach. In my previous life, he had lived past 18, but only by a mere 6 years. But he was ambitious. He had never married, had no children. Yet when he died, His personal fortune was more than half of the national. I couldn't imagine what he would have become if he had lived longer, or if he had been healthy. What is the meaning of this, Miss She? Damien's dark eyes were fixed on me. I, Seraphina of the She family. Despise fools, I said, raising an eyebrow. Before we form an alliance, let me see what you are capable of. Damien laughed. A real laugh this time, which brought a touch of color to his pale face. He slowly raised his teacup. Secret dealings were anathema to the old Seraphina. But I needed an ally. A wise one. The capital was quiet. The rumors died down after a few days. How could the engagement possibly be off? The eldest daughter of the Shia family was destined to be empress. If the crown prince didn't marry her, who would? Julian was happy. The emperor was displeased with him, so he took Alara on a spring hunt. Out of the capital, he naturally wouldn't notice the flurry of business transactions, or perhaps he wouldn't have cared even if he had been here. The crown prince never lacked for money, and if he did, my family would have provided. He also didn't notice the quiet staff changes in his own palace. Just a few maids and matrons, after all. Is that all? I wrote to Damien. The sickly first prince was a man of few words. He didn't reply to that letter. A few days later, a new play appeared in the capital. A nobleman is saved by a common girl, and they fall in love. But the girl is a commoner, and the nobleman's family cannot accept her. In the end, of course, they overcome all obstacles and live happily ever after. The nobleman's closing speech: what if she is a commoner? Why can't a commoner be the lady of the house? To repay kindness is the act of a gentleman. If one cannot be a gentleman, how can one be the head of a clan? The plot was so familiar that as the play grew in popularity, public opinion began to shift. Why can't a commoner be the mother of the nation? If the crown prince cannot even repay a debt of gratitude, how can he be the ruler of the nation? For the crown prince to want to marry the mute girl is the act of a gentleman. The crown prince should marry the mute girl. Almost at the same time, a strange phenomenon was reported from the forest where the crown prince was hunting. Hundreds of birds were circling the mute girl's carriage, singing, 100 birds paying homage to the phoenix. When the crown prince returned to the capital, the people lined the streets to welcome him. He held the mute girl in his arms, his face beaming. Quite clever, to use public opinion to force the emperor's hand, and to kill 3 birds with 1 stone, ruin Julian's future, cut off my father's path of retreat, and drive a wedge between Julian and the emperor. As for the 100 birds paying homage, it was just a trick to fool the common people. The emperor would never suspect the reclusive Damien. He would assume it was all Julian's doing, and Julian, in his excitement, would probably think it was a sign from the heavens. "How was it?" Damien wrote. "Not bad. Is that all?" I smiled, and had the white jade sent to him, with a note. "Your Highness, perhaps it is time to press your advantage." "Are you sure, Miss She?" "Of course." Now that we were allies, there was no room for hesitation. Leah cursed Julian and Alara for 3 days straight, but shameless was the worst she could come up with. This time, there were no rumors in the capital. Everyone was certain the engagement was off. They were just waiting for my downfall, and the engagement was indeed broken, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall. They say the palace was in an uproar that day. Julian brought a group of scholars who supported his cause, eyewitnesses to the 100 birds, and several high-dan-ranking monks, and they all knelt outside the throne room. My father, upon hearing the news, rushed to the palace with my uncles and some of his prot fei-feis. My family had never been so humiliated. "Your Majesty, since His Highness the Crown Prince has made up his mind, please grant his wish. We have no complaints." Another group knelt. All this for a mute girl. The emperor had been angry, but what could he do? But as the rumors said, If he broke off the engagement with the daughter of the most powerful family in the court, who would dare to marry her? To ruin my life like this, how could he face his loyal minister? Would the century-long harmony between the imperial family and mine be broken? At that crucial moment, an unexpected person appeared. I had sent Damien a note that day. Dress nicely. My father, for all his sternness, is a great judge of character by appearance. So, as the story goes, when he appeared, he was the very picture of elegance and grace. It wasn't until he knelt that people realized it was the reclusive, sickly first prince. And his first words were even more shocking. "Father, I ask for the hand of Seraphina of the Shia family in marriage." A single sentence that changed everything. The emperor remembered he had another son, who, despite his poor health, had already outlived the astrologer's prediction. My father saw a young man who was far more pleasing to the eye than the bewitched crown prince. The two men exchanged a look and understood each other. Only the crown prince, they said, was once again pricelessly stunned. Before he could say a word, the emperor had issued his decree. My engagement to the crown prince was annulled, and I was to be married to the first prince. The crown prince and the mute girl, Alara, were also to be married on a later date. The matter was settled. When I received the edict, I felt a rare sense of joy. The first move had gone so smoothly. It just goes to show how important it is to choose the right ally. But no sooner had I received the edict than Julian showed up. He was finally getting his wish, yet instead of celebrating with Alara, he came to bother me. "The crown prince and dogs are not allowed," I ordered. Unfortunately, only Laia in my courtyard dared to shout that at him. "Seraphina, I think you've gone mad," he raged from outside. "I came to warn you in good faith. Damien is a cripple. If you know what is good for you, you'll find a way to break off this engagement, or you'll regret it." I was in a good mood and couldn't even be bothered to raise an eyebrow for him. I just slowly opened the letter in my hand. "When do we make our second move?" My ally was certainly more proactive than the dog outside. I wrote back, "Not yet, enjoy the show." Before Julian killed me, he had said many things, but I was in too much pain to remember most of it. One sentence, however, stuck with me. "If it weren't for you, if it weren't for your family, Alara and I could have been together forever." This time without me, without my family, a plague had broken out in the south, and the crown prince had volunteered to lead the relief efforts. A good thing, but was it appropriate to bring a woman with him? Of course. The mute girl, soon to be crown princess, was a gift from the heavens, and she even knew some medicine. The tea houses were buzzing with gossip. "Is this the show you were talking about?" Damien suddenly laughed. "Seraphina is like fine tea, a pity some people are blind." I looked up. He was indeed handsome, especially when he smiled, the mole at the corner of his eye adding a certain charm. We had been meeting for tea for months now, our conversations easy and pleasant. It was just my gaze drifted downwards. He was very thin. Seeing me look at him, he leaned over and poured me more tea. A prince, a businessman, yet he smelled of ink. "So quiet today?" he asked. It wasn't that I was quiet. I was thinking about what Julian had said. Damien is a cripple. "Hey," I grabbed his collar. "Can you have children?" His eyelids fluttered. He slowly put down the teapot. His eyes were calm, but the mole at the corner was a deep yin red. He tilted my chin up. "Shall we try?" I actually wanted to. If he couldn't have children, my whole plan would be for naught. But even a rebel like me couldn't try in a tea house. A month later, the show I had promised him finally began. The crown prince went south to fight the plague with his beloved mute girl, but she caught the disease and didn't get better. The frantic prince sent her back to the capital. But not only did she return, so did he. She had drugged him and brought him back. His Highness was showing symptoms. I was already dying. How could I leave him there to die? She had tearfully written in my previous life, "A general who loses a battle must still defend his flag." The crown prince, who had volunteered to go to the plagues and stricken area, not only sent his infected mistress back to the capital, but also abandoned his post and fled. And he wasn't even sick, just had a common cold. Last time, my father had suppressed the incident. But this time, he was no longer willing to help. The moment they entered the city, the capital exploded. The emperor was furious, denouncing the crown prince for his incompetence and lack of virtue. The crown prince's private funds had been mysteriously depleted over the past 6 months. His treasury was empty. He couldn't bring himself to ask for money, so he just let the negative publicity rage on. Time for the second move. I wrote to Damien. I was going to expose Ilara's fake muteness. Damien had already placed some of his people in the crown prince's palace. It wouldn't be hard to make a person who could already speak. But before we could act, someone played right into our hands. The crown prince, depressed from the constant criticism, hadn't visited his beloved Ilara in 5 days. That evening, she sat on the railing of a bridge over the palace lake, crying and signing to him. "It is all my fault. I've brought you trouble. I will atone for my sins. In the next life, I will repay your love." Then she jumped. The lovesick prince, of course, jumped in after her. But in the dark, Ilara, who really couldn't swim, panicked when he didn't come to her rescue and screamed, "Help, help, your highness, I'm over here." They say the crown prince's expression at that moment was, once again, priceless. After that, the crown prince's palace was filled with either angry shouts or mournful cries. A few days later, he was back at the throne room kneeling. "Father, please take back your decree. I want to break off the engagement." My mother had always taught me that for a woman, especially a noble woman, love was a dangerous thing. To love someone, you must only give 7 parts of your heart and keep 3 for yourself. Had no one taught the crown prince this? Perhaps not. He had been spoiled his whole life. He was used to getting everything he wanted. The emperor was so angry he almost drew his sword. The crown prince made a scene in front of my door, where he found Damien. You haven't even married, and have you no shame?" he sputtered, seeing the marks on my neck. "My dear brother," Damien's voice, like jade, came from within. "You and that mute girl have done things without a proper engagement. What about us? I, unlike you, am faithful to the one I have chosen, and you should be calling her sister Zaninzan-Law." Julian left, and I didn't see him for a while. He had fallen ill. My own wedding preparations began. One day, Ilara showed up at my door, kneeling and begging me to go and see the prince, who was calling my name in his sleep. She even offered to be a concubine. Laia threw her out, but her words made me uneasy. Was it possible that Julian remembered? If he remembered his past life, what would be my third move? I had boasted to Damien that with our alliance, it would only take 3 moves to get him what was rightfully his. I would never let Julian sit on that throne. I had people watch the crown prince's palace. He had recovered and seemed normal. He had postponed his wedding to Ilara, which only made me more anxious. He was not one to give up. Was he postponing because he knew the end was near? My third move was planned for a night 1 month later, the night the emperor would pass away quietly in the autumn wind. In my previous life, Julian had ascended the throne without a hitch, but this time, there was Damien. There was me. I prepared everything. I spoke with my father. I gave Damien the palace defense plans. I wrote to my brothers. Julian, as usual, went about his days, and Alara continued her tearful act. As the night approached, I sent Julian a note. Meet me at the moat at midnight. He was already there when I arrived. One look at him, and I knew my guess was right. The look in his eyes was not that of a young crown prince, but of a man who had been emperor for 10 years. It has been a few years since we've been here, Seraphina, he said, looking at the dark water. I remember you fell in from that rock over there. You cried and cried. I was the one who pulled you out. Your Highness has a good memory. I smiled. I don't remember. So you planned to stay away from me from the moment you came back, didn't you? What else? I shot him a look. Wait for you to kill me again. He sighed. Seraphina, I was wrong about you. It was the Chen clan. They planted a spy by Alara's side and switched her potion, framing your family. I trusted you, which is why I didn't save her in time. But then she really died. I didn't want to hear it. The circumstances of her death were suspicious. I knew that. But what did it matter? What was done. Even if she did kill herself because I suggested you take her as a concubine. So what? I said coldly. The decision was yours. You were the one who wavered when the Emperor refused, weren't you? And for my well-intentioned advice, you destroyed my entire family. I thought, I don't want to hear it. The autumn wind was cold. Julian looked at me and suddenly smiled. I know where the problem lies. He grabbed my arm and pulled me to a large tree. He had brought Alara. She was bound and gagged. Those who deceive me shall be punished. With a flash of his sword, he slit her throat. This was the woman he had supposedly loved so dearly. The man before me was not just the Julian from 10 years in the future. He was ruthless. Are you satisfied? I asked, looking away from her unclosed eyes. Seraphina, I know I was wrong. For years I regretted it every day. I built you a shut up. I didn't want to hear another word, he laughed. 3 o'clock in the morning. You were waiting for this time, weren't you? That was the time the imperial physician had declared the emperor's death in my previous life. Seraphina, do you really think you can win without your family's support, just by allying with that useless Damien? I will show you who wins tonight. He pulled me onto his horse and galloped towards the palace. As we entered the city gates, a signal flare shot up from the direction of the palace. It was the signal from the Crown Prince's palace, telling him the emperor was dead. The imperial guards were already under his control. The palace was in chaos. In front of the emperor's chambers, a dense crowd had gathered. Julian's personal guard, the imperial army, the capital garrison, and my family's soldiers were all there. As he reined in his horse, a thunderous cry of "Your Highness" erupted. The winner was clear. Damien was held by 2 guards. My 2 brothers were also captured, their hands bound, blades at their necks. My family's soldiers were all kneeling. Julian dismounted and held out his hand to me. Come, my empress. I just looked at him. He extended his hand further, his expression devout. Seraphina, in this life, I will make you the happiest empress. I glanced around at the crowd, then up at the moon. The timing was perfect. I looked at him and tilted my head. Has he won? He frowned, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had noticed that the number of my family's soldiers was too small. Rebellious son, a voice boomed from the front. Who do you think you are, calling yourself I? Julian looked up in disbelief. Standing in the doorway of the bedchamber, clad in a night robe, was the emperor. My third move had not been disrupted by Julian's rebirth, because I knew that people, especially a cruel and bloodthirsty tyrant like him, always project their own intentions onto others. In his eyes, on this night, I would inevitably use my family's power to seize the palace, forge the emperor's will, and put Damien on the throne. He would never have considered another possibility, because he too was eagerly awaiting this night, the night he would reclaim his power. But I would not let him have it. My third move was never a coup. The emperor was a good emperor. Since I knew he was destined to die on this night, why not take precautions? Julian had only been back for a month. He probably didn't know that for the past 6 months, the emperor's health had been closely monitored, his pulse taken 3 times a day. His health was actually much better than in my previous life. My plan had always been to simply make the emperor suspicious of Julian, and to do that, I needed a little help from Alara's feigned death potion. Of course, in my original plan, the emperor was also supposed to die tonight. The only thing that had changed was that I had invited Julian to the moat. If he had been in the palace, he would have noticed the discrepancy in the number of soldiers. The coup tonight was, of course, orchestrated with the emperor's cooperation. The emperor trusted my father. When my father told him Julian might be planning something, he agreed to test him. He just didn't know about the potion. The next time I saw Julian was 3 months later, in the dungeons. It was winter, and the snow was falling, just like the day I died. The dungeons were freezing. He was thin, in chains, wearing a thin prisoner's uniform. His downfall had been swift and brutal. The emperor, deeply disappointed by his ruthlessness in seizing control of the guards, had refused to see him even on his deathbed. Yes, despite the best care, the emperor's life had only been extended by 3 months. Julian looked up when he heard me approach. His eyes lit up. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "Serafina, you still won't forgive me." I couldn't help but laugh. "Serafina, we've both come back. This is a second chance from the heavens." "I don't think so," I said, keeping a safe distance. "Perhaps it is because some people died too unjustly." His eyes dimmed. "Julian, do you know why we were married for 10 years and I never conceived?" He looked at my stomach. "Because from the day I married you, my father gave me a contraceptive. The power of the Empress's family was too great. It was not a good time for a child. But we did have a child." His pupils contracted. "When you killed me, I was 3 months pregnant. Why didn't you tell me? Why should I have a child with a man like you?" His face turned ashen, a rare expression of pain on his features. "Julian, I was actually worried you hadn't come back. I was afraid you would think you had died unjustly." I drew my dagger and plunged it into his chest. He looked at me in shock, the pain in his eyes overflowing. "This is what you owe me," I said quietly. The snow fell harder, covering the palace grounds. Damien was waiting for me outside. "The ground is slippery," he said, crouching down. "Let me carry you." I climbed onto his back. He was very thin, still recovering from a recent illness. But I didn't want to walk. His back wasn't very warm, but I leaned against him. Perhaps it was because of our successful collaboration, or perhaps it was because he never asked why, but a few tears fell from my eyes. He sighed. "You are not unloved. Is it possible that I earned all that money just so that when you became empress, the treasury would be full and your reign would be stable?" I jumped off his back. "Hey, now that you've achieved your goal, are you trying to play the sympathy card? Trying to make me soften up?" Damien rubbed his nose. "You saw right through me." The day Damien ascended the throne, he divided the imperial seal in 2. As we had agreed, we would rule together. But he didn't seem very interested in being emperor. He would often delegate his duties to my father, who he had appointed as regent. Eventually, He just gave me his half of the seal. I enjoyed discussing matters with him. It was a pleasure to talk to someone with a sharp mind. 6 months later, I was pregnant. He became even less involved in state affairs, always by my side. Our child was a boy. Damien was overjoyed and wanted to name him Crown Prince immediately. I thought of Julian and shook my head. The next year, I wanted to expand the harem. I couldn't be the only one having children, could I? Damien refused. I'm too weak, he said. The man who had been so vigorous even when he was ill was now claiming to be weak. The 3rd year, our son was walking and talking. The palace was filled with laughter. I started pushing Damien to attend to his duties. My father was getting old. The 4th year, I was pregnant again. Time seemed to be flying by. Occasionally, Damien would ask me, "How many years do I have left?" See, he was a clever one. Not asking didn't mean he didn't notice my strange behavior. Just until tomorrow, I would reply. And when you're gone, I'll use your money to keep a whole palace full of male consorts. You know how rebellious I am. The 5th year, our 2nd child, a princess, was born. Damien was ecstatic and suggested making her the crown princess. I ignored him. The 5th year, Damien turned 25. He had already outlived his previous life by a year. I wasn't upset. After all, my original plan had been to have a child and get rid of the father. A man who would die without me having to lift a finger was perfect. The 5th year, Damien took me to watch the sunrise. As the light broke through the clouds, the capital below was peaceful and serene. As we walked down the mountain, I silently took his sleeve. The years were quiet and good. It didn't matter how long we had, all that mattered was the present.